Yo, hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about veganism, my journey with a bit of vegetarianism and all that stuff about eating plants. So, a bit about my experience with this stuff. I was vegetarian actually for a year and a half in 2020, I believe. Because I have a close friend from school who's vegan, and she sent me a recommendation to watch this documentary called Seaspiracy. It was on Netflix a few years ago. You may remember it, but it was essentially about the fishing industry, and that was a very interesting documentary, and it actually did change my mind. Uh, I decided to stop eating fish after that because it revealed a lot of stuff about like the fishing industry, the corruption that happens, the impact it's having on ecosystems, all of that stuff, right? And I thought, if I'm going to stop eating fish, I might as well stop eating meat as well. And I also watched Cowspiracy, which is kind of the twin documentary they also had. So I decided to go vegetarian, and I was vegetarian for a year and a half until I went on a trip to France, a university trip to France, and one of my friends who was vegetarian at the time, on the ferry, I just saw him eating. I think it was like a chicken leg or something, and I said, "Right, what's going on here? I thought you were vegetarian." And he said, "Well, you see, France doesn't have very good vegetarian options, so for this week, I'm going to be not vegetarian." And I said, "That's an interesting idea. Maybe I'll try that as well." So I gave it a go. So I started eating meat again for that week, and that got me thinking about things. And I basically never looked back and have been eating meat ever since. So what happened? So I know that veganism makes a lot of sense, right? The meat industry has so much negative impact on the world in terms of environmental stuff, and there's also all of the ethical issues of imprisoning animals and then murdering them for us to eat. That is all true. However, me as a person, as one person, have no impact on any of that happening, right? If I now, as a meat eater, decided to turn vegan, I am almost certain that I would have zero impact on the amount of animals being killed in the world throughout my entire lifetime. And that might not make sense, but this is what I'm saying, right? We are so disconnected from the way that food is produced. Back in the day, you'd go like people lived in little villages. You'd go to the market to get your food, and that market might be sold by a farmer or the person who's actually grown that meat, grown those vegetables. They've raised those animals and killed those animals themselves, and they're now selling that meat. So in that scenario, me becoming vegan, not buying stuff from that farmer anymore, actually would have an impact because that's telling that farmer that one less person is going to eat that meat, and therefore demand is slightly reduced, and therefore he might raise less animals next year and then kill one less animal for me. That's possible in that scenario. So essentially, with veganism, the logic is that you are reducing demand by not buying these meat items and these animal products. You're reducing demand for them, which in theory is then going to reduce the amount of animals being killed, right? In this day and age, though, if you buy meat from the supermarket, that is not coming directly from the farmer, right? So let's say I'm going to Lidl, okay? I buy a steak from Lidl. Lidl has bought that steak from a meat distributor or like a meat wholesaler, right? That wholesaler has bought their meat from a slaughterhouse, like an institution that actually kills the animals, processes the meat, right? That institution buys its meat from the farmers, okay? So there's like three avenues: supermarket to wholesaler, wholesaler to slaughterhouse, slaughterhouse to farmer. There's three avenues where demand has to be changed in order for a change to happen. So it might be that when I buy one less steak from Lidl, Lidl is going to put in a smaller order to the wholesaler, which means the wholesaler is going to put in a smaller order to the slaughterhouse, which means the slaughterhouse is going to put a smaller order to the farmer, and therefore the farmer next year or in like 3 months is going to raise slightly less cows so that less cows are killed. And okay, so that is a scenario where I would actually make a difference. Do I think that scenario would ever actually happen? No, because I mean, like, with all probabilities considered, that is just not going to happen. Like, it's insanely unlikely. And this is the other thing. If by not buying meat, it's like in that last scenario, it's not like the farmer is going to let cows free. The farmer is just going to breed less. The only difference I could feasibly make is if less cows were bred. Like, they're just going to breed less of them. It's not like they have an excess of cows and some of those cows are going to be released into the wild. Like, that's just not going to happen. So essentially, what I'm saying is, I can never have an impact on the welfare of these animals. And if I become vegan, these institutions are still going to exist. The demand is still going to be there. So you might say, "Oh, Sean, but what if by being vegan you influence people around you to become vegan as well, and in that way you can have a bigger impact?" That is decent logic because that's what's actually happened to me with my vegan friend who convinced me to be vegetarian for a year and a half. And I think that logic holds up if we were in a much smaller society. So let's say we were in, I'm in like a village of 100 people, right? And then that village is fed by a farmer that produces meat for the village, okay? And I convinced like 10 people in the village to become vegan with me. That is going to be significant enough for the farmer to reconsider how much meat he is producing, okay? In our society, I'm living in the UK with like 80 million people or whatever, right? If I convince 100 people, it's going to have absolutely no impact. If I convince 100 people to be vegan, it's going to have absolutely no impact on what's happening on the farm level, right? So I've got this slightly pessimistic view that whatever I do is not going to have an impact on the overall institution. So I might as well just give up and eat meat because I enjoy it, and it's also good protein, right? and the animals are going to die anyway. So this is the other thing, right? The animals are being killed anyway, and food waste is a thing that exists. With every cycle of meat that gets produced, a certain percentage of that will never be eaten because it gets expired, because people don't buy it, whatever. So there is a point in saying that in buying this meat, it's already being killed. Like, it's already being killed. The meat is already there. It's not like I'm putting in an order for a cow to be killed and that cow is killed. That's a completely different story. What I'm saying is the meat is already there on the shelf. I'm just buying it. And as long as I'm not wasting it, there is an argument in saying that I am actually putting it to good use and not wasting it by eating it. Like, imagine if you're a cow that's killed for meat, right? And then your meat just gets thrown in the bin. That's just so disrespectful. But if someone actually eats it and enjoys it, and they go to the gym and protein is being used and is actually going into their body and being used inside of their body, that is a much more worthy cause for your meat to go to, right? I think, anyway. I'm not saying it's ideal for the cow. It's obviously not ideal for them, but it's at least better than their meat being thrown in the bin. Right. So that's where I'm at. So the alternative is that if I cared about this passionately, I could start campaigning for action against the meat industry, and then in that way, I could actually have a big impact on this stuff. I personally am not passionate about it enough to do that, but there are people that are passionate enough to do that, and that's great. They have my full support. But until a change actually happens, I'm just going to keep eating meat because I just don't see any benefit I can actually have through the demand that I have as a single person eating meat. So I think change has to come from the top. I mean, it starts on the bottom. It starts from the bottom, right? Like, people are angry at the bottom, and then they go to the top, and then they speak to the people at the top, convince people at the top, and then that's when change actually happens, right? It comes from top down. So I think the change has already started from the bottom. There's a lot of people campaigning. I'm not one of them, but I know it's happening. And then eventually, hopefully, there is going to be some change happening that comes from the top down, and then I will happily go along with whatever change happens, right? But until that happens, I'm just going to use the system because it's working in my benefit at the moment. So, what is actually the solution? So, if I were to redesign society, if I were to redesign the meat industry, here's what I would do, right? I would get rid of farming meat, right? And instead, I would have like hunting grounds. So I would have like these big fields, right, of animals in them. And if you want to have meat, you need to go and kill that animal yourself. And you actually have to do it yourself, and it would be illegal to kill that animal and then give it to someone else. Like, you can't have people who are just going batch killing animals and then selling it. You have to go and kill the animal yourself, and then you get that meat, right? And I think this solves the issue that is prevalent in society if people are very disconnected from their food, right? So, like, people use this argument of you shouldn't be eating meat if you won't kill the animal yourself, right? If you had to kill the animal, so many less people would eat meat because so many people cannot bear the thought of killing an animal, which I think is completely fair enough. But I think there is an argument to be made that if you won't kill it yourself, then you shouldn't be eating it because that blood isn't on your hands anymore. Because you're getting someone else to do the dirty work of killing this animal, right? When you wouldn't actually do it yourself. So your hands are clean and you're just getting the benefit of it. And that does present a bit of a moral conundrum, I think. So if you had this hunting system, right, where you had these big, massive fields with, whatever, cows, pigs, and you'd have to go and kill that animal and you'd bring it back. I think that would solve a lot of the issues because so much less meat would be eaten. And I think if you kill the animal yourself, you're going to try to use all of it for sure. Like, I think people would waste meat a lot less because they'd value it more. And then you'd also probably, because there'd just be less animals, you'd solve a lot of the environmental issues as well. I think the same with fish. I think if people would, like, there'd be these big lakes and you'd have to fish your own fish. I think that'd be really cool because people would be way more connected to it. You have these massive lakes, and some people would be fishing with rods, some people would be swimming and spearfishing. I think it would be really cool, actually. And that those fish are like living actually good lives. They're not just like living in this tiny cage. And you know, it wouldn't be, you know, this hunting ground would be massive. These animals would be living decently. You know, they'd be grazing on the grass, having a great time, and the welfare would be good. And then at some point, someone would just come along and shoot them in the head, and that's fine, because you're actually hunting the animal. That's what I think anyway. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if this is a controversial opinion. Um, but that is what I think. I think that is what the meat industry should go towards, and I actually don't think that will ever happen because people who are pushing against the meat industry are pushing for abolition of it rather than a change towards hunting grounds, which actually. But you know, I think that's actually I think the hunting ground thing is actually optimal. Oh yeah, okay. So here's the other thing, right? With eating meat and just being environmentally friendly in general. Okay, let me propose a thought experiment. If I, you know, a 23-year-old man, were to say murder, wouldn't actually do it. Right? I'm just saying this is a thought experiment. If I were to murder another 23-year-old and no one found out about it, I could then live the rest of my life with a completely clear conscience about my environmental impact because I've taken away the environmental impact of another person who was my age. So every day that they're not living, producing carbon, I'm now net zero because I'm producing carbon, but I've taken away theirs. What I'm saying is, you only have the emissions. You only eat the amount of meat that one person does, right? So I'm not saying you should murder someone who is your own age in order to eat meat for the rest of your life with a completely clear conscience. But if you did, it would work, is what I'm saying. If you're trying to reduce the amount of meat that's consumed in the country. Okay, so murdering someone's a bit insane, but how about this? What if you just have one less child than you were going to? Okay, so let's say you want two children and you only have one instead. Well, now you've actually made carbon profit because all of the environmental damage that child was going to do is now not going to happen because they never exist. And therefore, you are now clear for the rest of your life. It's possible. So the point of that thought experiment is putting into perspective that you only have the impact of one person, right? So whatever you do, right, there's always going to be some guy who is eating 3 steaks a day, and then you might as well just eat like 1 steak a week because compared to him, you're just having negligible impact. But yeah, I mean, I think change eventually has to come from the top, and until that does, like it has to come from government level, right? The government will have to regulate the meat industry and how meat is bought and consumed and sold. Until that happens, I think just try and be a good person and, you know, live life to the full. We're all going to die one day anyway, so you might as well enjoy it. All right, that's it for now. See you later.